Hello, I'm Van Tucker. I'm president and CEO of Launch Tennessee. We are the economic development engine for the state for entrepreneurs and innovators. We're one of the few states in the nation that coordinate resources across our state with 7 entrepreneur centers in our major markets, 4 industry focused mentor network verticals, and Bunker Labs, which supports veteran entrepreneurs. And I'm thrilled to be with these other 4 wonderful women today.
Hi, everybody. So excited to kick off the session. Welcome to the session on the fundraising. And I'm super excited to share the stage with these amazing women here. My name is Anna. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Zvook. We are a redefining and revolutionizing the way how brands collaborate with podcasts. So we're actually a platform that helps brands find the most relevant podcasts to collaborate with. And with a few clicks of a button, you can actually confirm campaigns across different podcast networks, across different podcast sizes. And we're actually the only platform in the world that helps brands instantly find the right relevant podcast bundles for their budget and for their customer persona. I am from Finland. For the past 10 years, I've lived all around the world. Before I came to New York, I lived for 8 years in Singapore. My background is in sales and media analytics. And then I ended up running what ended up being one of the top tech startup events in Southeast Asia before jumping into my own entrepreneurial adventure. And with Zvook, we have raised just over $500,000 of pre-seed funding from VCs, and actually currently are fundraising for our seed round. So this is a very relevant topic for me to talk about right now.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Van Tucker, for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm Cahn. I'm the founder and CEO of iFundWomen. iFundWomen is the go-to funding marketplace for women-owned businesses and all the people who want to fund and support them. We're a fintech. We're a two-sided marketplace. On one side of the marketplace, we've got women-owned businesses. There are about 13 million here in the US and about 163 million globally in markets that we serve. And on the other side of the marketplace, we've got all the people who want to fund and support them, from individuals to brands to enterprises to venture capital firms, family offices, et cetera. And we make the magic happen in the middle. And the problem that we're working on solving is the lack of early stage funding options for women entrepreneurs. Only 1% of companies, regardless of the gender of the founder, will ever raise venture capital. So what do the other 99% of us do? We max out our credit cards, or we go into debt funding businesses that may not work. And, most startups fail, and that's totally okay. But what we don't believe is okay at iFundWomen is that it's not okay failing going into debt. So we've designed a pretty holistic set of products and services that are all meant to not only help you raise debt-free capital through crowdfunding and through enterprise grants. We have amazing partners like Visa and Unilever and American Express and Adidas, and the list goes on, who want to support women entrepreneurs through these debt-free grants that we broker on behalf of them. But we also, I think importantly, our ed tech platform that we built into the marketplace is kind of like startup school. And we're teaching you everything from obviously how to raise capital, but how to set up your Google Analytics, how to do retargeting ads, how to think about your subscription model, how to hire the best talent. So there's so many things that go into starting a business beyond just raising capital, which of course is the number one, thing that people need to do to get their businesses going. But the coaching and the tactical, practical information from women who have been there and done that and look like you, and can just give you the no BS, like, here's how you do a business plan. Here's how you do an investor deck. Here's how you do retargeting ads. That has really made the difference for our founders, at least that we work with, in how much they actually raise in not only crowdfunding, but also in venture capital when they go on to raise VC. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Awesome. And I'm Sarah Kunst. I run Cleo Capital. We are a pre-seed venture capital fund, and we primarily focus on future of income, complicated consumer, and decentralized enterprise. I'm also a former senior advisor at Bumble, where I helped them launch their corporate VC arm a couple years ago. And we were one of the first corporate funds to focus on investing in women of color. So it's been exciting over the last year to see other people catch up.
Great. And hi, thank you for having me. I'm Jennifer Tegan. I am Managing Director of New York Ventures. And New York Ventures is a venture capital arm that sits within New York State government, which a lot of people don't realize that we have there. But I'm within the economic development agency called Empire State Development. And at New York Ventures, we're an impact fund. Our belief is that the private sector doesn't do a good job with providing equitable access to capital to all the entrepreneurs who are deserving of it. And the way that we filter that and define it is that for geographically, so outside of New York City versus inside of New York City is important to us, given the state that we serve. We want to make sure that more people outside of New York City also have access to capital as well as inside the city. We also look to fund diverse teams. So women and minority founders are super important to us. And currently we have over 56% of our companies are founded or led by a woman or minority. And then finally, the third area that we look to are the areas that are of strategic interest and importance to the state of New York, but again, are challenged sometimes when it comes to being able to raise capital for them. And the categories that they tend to fall into are clean energy, climate solutions, advanced manufacturing, agricultural technology, and healthcare technology, which is not an area that's hard to get funding for, but is super important to New York State and to the economy and to the country right now.
Well, I'm not sure what happened to our moderator, Geri, but I will, Charles, I guess if it's okay with you, I'd like to start the conversation with success stories. We always, during these panels, seem to talk about obstacles or ways that things don't happen. I would love for each of you to share how something really came together and how you helped with that, or how your organization helped with that. Just something that you're really proud of. Who wants to start?
I do.
Go, Karen.
So many unbelievable things have been going on in the iFundWomen ecosystem. So 34% of our alumni who go through our program raise venture capital, which is really, really exciting. We don't believe that VC is the marker of a successful entrepreneur, but for those entrepreneurs who are VC appropriate and can raise, it's unbelievable. It's a great way to grow, obviously. So we've got thousands of successfully raised funds that come out of iFundWomen, which is, they crowdfund first to prove demand, and then they go on to raise VC. So I'll shout out a couple. So Genève, which is a company out of the West Coast. I've talked a lot this week, you guys, sorry. They raised a $4 million seed round this past year, which was very exciting. They are a telemedicine company that is focused in on menopause, which is a topic that lots of people don't want to talk about, but $4 million in a seed round proves that there's a big market for it. So good on you, Jill Angelo. Unbound Babes, who has been around for a while, Polly Rodriguez, I bet a lot of people know her. Sex tech company, she's raised, since she started on iFundWomen, $3.7 million in VC. I have so many more examples, but I think the thing I'm most proud of this in the last year and change is how many women entrepreneurs that iFundWomen has helped get their PPP loans and help them not only stay in business, brick and mortars, so companies that maybe, aren't ready for VC or whatever it is, getting your PPP loans, especially with, PPP 1 last year was a nightmare. And 10% of the women who applied through iFundWomen got their loans, as opposed to the 5% national average. Understanding it's not a, apples to apples comparison, but we coach them on how to do it. And this year, the number is even higher. So we're just seeing day after day our dashboard of who is getting their loans and how we're helping them through it. That's really, really exciting. So we're excited about the changes that are afoot with this new administration.
Nice. Sarah, you have some success stories?
Yeah, so lots and lots, but an exciting one from this week actually is one of my companies was filed, as well as our fund in a Harvard Business School case study. And so it was just really exciting to see. It was about a financing round. It wasn't about gender or race or anything like that. It was just about, hey, here's an interesting company, and did they make the right decision by taking money from Cleo? We were excited to see that the students thought that they had. But it's just always great to see those moments, and it was especially special for the founder, who had actually she's a French immigrant, and she had actually turned down Harvard Business School, and her parents were very disappointed, but she felt like being a founder was the right path for her. And so, we got to tell her parents she made it to Harvard anyway. So it was a very fun moment this week.
Jennifer, it's always interesting, and Jennifer and I both have state organizations that are, it sounds like you're much more of a public organ. We're a quasi-public agency and part of the state government here. But we have a lot of success stories that may look a little different from Karen or Anna or Sarah. Can you share a story with us where things have just gone really well?
Sure. So I've been in this role since April. Nothing was going on in the state then, right? But after an 18-year career in the private sector, and it's been a joy to kind of double down on being able to have greater impact and really look to areas where the public sector can serve a better role to fill in the gaps where the private sector hasn't. But probably the company that has been, they're all great to work with, but one that I'm most proud of in the year that I've been there was a company called The Crew, and it's founded by Tiffany Dufu, who is a woman of color founder, incredibly inspired person who her whole mission in life is to help women and girls to achieve their goals. And the way that she does this is to, and she started her own company using a crew, using her own circle of women, her own accountability circle of women, explaining what her mission in life was. And they all convinced her to start her company. And so she did, and she raised over $2 million in capital this year during the pandemic, which is pretty extraordinary, and is now, off and running with making that a reality. So, building crews, creating, and she does it in a way that is, allowing for women to meet other diverse women at the same, or similar level in their career, and helping them to achieve their own goals and their own vision for what they'd like to do in their life. So, and it's a uplifting story too, because we all know that during this year, it's been incredibly tough for women in the workforce. And so to be part of something and to be supporting something that is helping women to survive this period and come out better, hopefully on the other side, has been great.
We had the first Black woman to raise $1 million in our state happened during COVID, and I'm incredibly proud of Shawnee Dowell and the company that she's built called Possip. And I think she's a great example of what's happened in the last year in our entrepreneurial ecosystem, where you have some companies that have had a rough time. They've had a really tough time raising money, but then you have others that the pandemic has really escalated the need for their business. And I think Shawnee certainly falls into that category. Shawnee has Possip is an app that allows schools and parents to speak to one another. Which is key. I mean, you can imagine how the demand for her product escalated over the last year.
Critical.
And yeah, it was incredibly critical. And so now she's in a great number of school systems across the country, and her company is growing exponentially. And she credits, we have a very small pre-seed fund that we use. Geri had asked the question earlier, why is it important for government to support women or underrepresented populations? And I think Shawnee's a great example of that. She credits the credibility that she had when going to other investors by being able to say, Launch Tennessee believes in us. Launch Tennessee has invested in us. And I think that does help in many ways. Although if you spent any time at all with Shawnee, you would know she's incredibly impressive and probably didn't need our credibility at all. But I think, we've seen that. We've seen a lot of women funders really suffer over the last year, and not just with their companies, but their home life and just managing all the things that need to be managed over the last year. So I think it's incredibly impressive at all if women have survived the last year. Anna, you want to share a success story for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share a little founder perspective. We had a success story, and then I think I can also kind of touch upon a little bit of how that whole fundraising came together. So we were raising our pre-seed fund, $500,000 during the pandemic. So we literally started official fundraising in March. I had everything lined up, a great plan, everything. We launched our beta in March, and sort of everything was good. 2 weeks in, everything closes down, and we're like, what? And I'm quarantining somewhere in Brooklyn in my shared apartment, thinking, what is this? What are we doing here? What? And so through that, after the initial shock, we got talking to a few investors who then ended up investing actually from Europe. It's a fund from Europe. But what I found the most challenging, especially as a officially first-time founder who is fundraising, and I think a lot of the founders could probably relate to this, is sort of this cold start, right? So when you start and you don't necessarily have the networks, I came to New York in summer 2019 without knowing anybody. We didn't have any networks, no relationships, nothing. So back in Southeast Asia, where I had spent 8 years, people knew me. I could have gotten a meeting with any investor I wanted. Coming here, it's like, who are you? What have you done? Okay, cool. And so you really have to just be, you're as impressive as you come across, right? Nobody can say, hey, she's a great founder. She's a great executor. We believe in her. You should look into this woman. No. And so that kind of lack of network, I think was not just my problem. It is actually very common, I think, with a lot of especially female founders, because, a lot of the times we kind of start things from scratch, and we, for whatever reason, have to show a lot of very concrete, tangible sort of proof of how good we are, as opposed to a lot of men that roll way more on that, whatever you want to call it, right? That charisma, the hustle, they're oh, you got this big idea and somebody knows somebody who once worked with this guy. He's great, give him some money, right? So we didn't have any of that. So kind of going in, and I think when you're raising for your first round, they're one of two things that you need to have. Either you have that kind of credibility, and then you were talking somebody saying, hey, this person is actually credible, we've invested, or we know her, or whatnot. Or you have to have some metrics, right? You have to have some kind of traction, whatever that is. Well, we didn't have either of those things. And I found that cold start was really the most difficult part about the fundraise, going out there and trying to prove yourself. And they're yeah, we love the idea, but you're a little bit too early. That sentence, oh my God, I heard it so many times. I'm I dreamed about it, right? It's oh, but you're a little bit too early. Come back a little bit later, right? Come back when you have some other investors that have committed already, right? So getting that first one off, kind of to get the ball rolling is super important, in which case actually organizations like yours can be very helpful for female founders to be in that first one, to providing that credibility. And I think interestingly, I don't know, maybe you guys have some data on this, but I do think that this whole, if you think about men and women raising money, I think from men, there is this interesting brotherhood almost that exists, that hey, he is a great guy. You should look into that. You should speak with him. For women, I think we are a lot of the times, maybe subconsciously, not as eager to say, hey, she's great. You should look into that. Women supporting women. And I know it's in the recent, years, this has become more something that people talk about, but I think it's still not enough of that. So we still kind of have to go and show the numbers and show the traction or whatever. If I come there with a napkin and with my big goal, a lot of the VCs won't believe in me the same way how they believe maybe another guy who knows somebody. So relationships are important, but that's one of the very sort of, I think, the trickiest parts about fundraising for the first time, is how I found.
Yeah, Karen and Sarah, can you speak to why you decided to enter onto the funding side? And both of you have made such a significant contribution in very different ways, and it really is a man's world. But can you speak to maybe the pros and cons, why you made the decision to enter on the funding side to help women, and specifically both of you have been very significant in helping to fund women of color. Can you talk about why you made those decisions?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything is a man's world, right? Sometimes I give talks and to college students or MBAs, and they say, should I even think about getting into venture? It's so misogynist. I was like, sweetie, if you're a teacher in America or a nurse, men in your career make more than you do, even though they're thought of as female-focused careers. So everything's a man's world, and I would be a terrible nurse, have terrible bedside manners. So I figured I'd go do something I'm good at, and I got recruited into venture early in my career, and I just sort of had a knack for it. I also have always worked super hard. I get a little bit concerned sometimes when people come up to me and say, "We want to break into venture capital," and I say, "Okay, why?" And they're like, "Because it sounds cool." And I'm like, "No, like you should probably want to help companies, right? Or have a really unique worldview that you want to go fund." I think when it comes to fundraising, I get asked a lot, "Oh, what's your fundraising advice for women or people of color?" And like, it's just fundraising advice, right? It's not necessarily different. It's just a question of understanding that, as a woman, it will be harder. As a Black or Hispanic woman, it'll be 1,000 times harder, right? White women are playing a hard game on easy mode, and Black and Hispanic women are playing a hard game on hardest possible mode. And it's just kind of understanding that it's going to take more shots at bat, right? Fundraising is hard for functionally everyone. It sometimes feels like every white dude with an idea gets funded. I can tell you, living and breathing in Silicon Valley venture, that is deeply not true. Fundraising is hard, period. And, most people struggle to raise money, period. Most people do not have anybody who cares about their idea on a napkin, period. Right. And it's certainly harder for women and people of color. But I do think sometimes internalizing that this is actually hard for everybody, right? One conversation I have a lot with people, especially people of color, is around the friends and family round. They say, my friends and family don't have money. I've literally seen the cap tables of some of the fanciest companies in Silicon Valley. Almost never do you actually see family members, right? That term is a misnomer. What that generally means is, I went to a conference and I met somebody and we exchanged business cards, and then I invited them to an event, and then, I saw that they knew this angel investor and I sent them my pitch deck and they passed it along. And then that was part of my friends and family round, but really it was somebody I barely knew, right? So I'm an investor in a company called Lunch Club that is an AI sort of networker. To speak to some of Anna's points, it helps you, meet people who you might not otherwise know. And, you can pretty quickly get on there and set up, 5-6 meetings a week and start to build a network wherever you want, anywhere around the world, right? With investors or with other founders or potential co-founders. And so, there are barriers to everyone for fundraising, because I don't know, how often do you just hand somebody $1 million, right? But even on top of that, I think understanding that while it'll take a little bit longer, there are ways to kind of consciously figure out what are the hacks, what are the tips, right? I think in general, there's a lot of information asymmetry that goes on between sort of men and women and white versus people of color. Not certainly more than a funding asymmetry, but I do think that information asymmetry is a huge, huge gap.
Yeah, Karen, that's what I've always loved about iFundWomen is you do help people understand that friends and family can have a wider definition. Can you talk a little about that? Yeah,
and I agree with with really all of what Sarah said. And, so iFundWomen, it's a funding marketplace. Our first MVP product was a crowdfunding product. And the reason we built that as our MVP is because we really became dogmatic about the idea of crowdfunding for cash to prove demand for your product or service before you invest in supply. And by supply, I mean wasting years of your life trying to chase an equity round, because to Sarah's point, less than 1% of all companies, it doesn't matter what gender you are, what color you are, less than 1% of all companies raise VC. It's hard for everybody. So I agree with that. So we needed to figure out alternative sources of capital. And crowdfunding, back when we started, we didn't invent crowdfunding, obviously. It was Kickstarter and Indiegogo. And I'm a second-time startup founder. My first startup was a spectacular failure. And as a Hail Mary to make payroll, after 2 years of slogging it out, we trying to raise capital, couldn't raise capital. And it was hard. After 2 years of slogging it out, we did a Kickstarter to make payroll. And the minute we put that Kickstarter up, I'm like, oh, this is just sales and marketing. This is literally just demand gen. And why isn't anyone talking about this as your first stop? I don't care if you're a man or a woman or what you are. Why isn't anyone talking about this as your first stop on your funding journey to prove demand for your product or service before you invest in supply? And I say that twice because I think it's the genius of crowdfunding that no one's ever really talked about. When we think about crowdfunding, you think about the speaker cooler or the Pebble Watch or the Veronica Mars movie, or you're funding your friend's Kickstarter because it's your friend. But the reality is 94% of the highest grossing crowdfunding campaigns are from white male creators in consumer tech, gaming, and film, pardon me. And so when we did our Kickstarter, the light bulb dawned on Marblehead. I'm like, why have I been chasing VC? Why, before I even proved demand for what I was doing, which, by the way, there wasn't demand. We had to buy traffic. The first startup was we did everything wrong. So once we did that crowdfunding campaign, I said to my team, I'm like, we are sunsetting company number one. We are pivoting. We are taking some of our crowdfunding money and we are building a super scrappy crowdfunding MVP to see if anybody even wants to use this. And we just hung up a shingle literally on Facebook. It was before, we had no money to boost posts. We were out of money. I put up a Facebook post to just some friends. I was like, hey, our first startup failed. We couldn't raise capital. We built this really Frankenstein crowdfunding platform on a WordPress page, a WordPress plugin, a subdomain on Squarespace with some pretty product marketing pages, and a Slack plugin. I was like, if anyone wants to test this thing, it's probably going to break. But if you need cash to start your business, let me know. I really didn't think anyone was going to respond, truly, because the first startup was it was not Field of Dreams. It was the opposite. And when we had 200 applications to test this thing in 1 week, I was from strangers. That's when you have something. When you're solving a problem that all these strangers have, right? Not like your mom or your bestie. They're like, I'll do it. It wasn't that. So crowdfunding is when you, the entrepreneur, go out and raise small increments of money from a lot of people that to add up to just enough to get your thing off the ground, right? Because again, it's demand gen. And then from there, once you've proven demand and you've got actually revenue, you've got, a little bit of product market fit, right? Then you can go on to the next phase, which is, beta testing and, test learning and iterating. And you're going to need more capital at that point. So I think that's the moment where you see which path people are going to take, right? If they're going to go the VC route or if they're going to keep bootstrapping, and the best kind of funding, frankly, is revenue. We have plenty of companies that have been with us for 4 or 5 years that are running $5-10 million revenue companies that have never raised a drop of VC. And they're tired. They're tired, but they're killing it.
Yeah.
So,
So Jennifer, Karen and Sarah really raised a great point here that it's all about network. It's really all about networking. It's about just busting it and trying to find what the answer is for your company. Can you talk a little bit about how your state approaches funding and helping entrepreneurs and innovators find those networks and find places to plug in?
Sure. So, I sit on top of the venture capital fund that we have, but I sit within the small business division of the state. And we have a host of programs that my colleagues run to help companies that are coming in out of the university or out of the community or out of another company, or they lost their job and they need support to understand what it is to create a business, start a business, get legal services, get IP services, get, whatever it might be. So we try to provide that to anybody. And we have places all over the state. And every region, every major city has some kind of a hotspot or incubator or center. And then specifically for the entrepreneurs that we consider underestimated, right? The ones that might need a little more support with building a network. We actually just launched a program called the Entrepreneurship Navigator. So we actually provide an additional layer of attention and support to work hand in hand with those companies and look at what they might need, and plot it out for them. Is it an angel investor? Is it a lawyer? Is it an accountant? What are you looking for? What are you going to need? And then begin to help them in a more hands-on approach to make those connections to those people. So that's been our approach as a state. And we have a host of other programs, but I think specific to the question of network and what we do to help our entrepreneurs at all stages, that is a good overview. How about you, Van? What's happening in Tennessee?
Yeah, we have this network across the state, these entrepreneur centers in each of our major cities, and those are really the front door for the community. We also have, and the pandemic has accelerated this, a lot more virtual options for people to get coaching, to get mentoring, to get industry information, to connect with investors. So those 7 entrepreneur centers do serve as the front door. But they all have come up with much more accessible resources for people all over the state. The industry verticals that I spoke about, and specifically for women in STEM and research and innovation fields, we provide some specific support there. We have a very small pre-seed and seed fund that we administer.
Van, I think we can't hear you. Is anyone else having trouble hearing Van, or is it just me?
Yeah.
It looks like
you're muted, Van.
Oh, you're still muted. Yeah, you are still muted. Interesting. Maybe we will. I'll say for anybody watching, I just dropped a link in the chat. So if you are interested in checking out Lunch Club for networking, Anna, highly recommend.
I've actually used it before when I came to New York.
That's awesome. I love it.
It's really a great network of people.
Yeah.
So, and while Van's getting back online, so one just think that we've done a lot of research. So Olivia Owens, which is who's our first employee and one of our founding members of iFundWomen, launched iFundWomen of Color in January of 2020. I've lost track of time, and we have been focused on, since the inception of iFundWomen, our entrepreneurs have been 70% women of color, because those are the fastest growing segments of the entrepreneurship population in this country. And so we have always been focused on how do we create more access and resources for our members, which are largely women of color. So at first, when Olivia was hire number 1, I was like, should we do something separate? Should we have, a separate platform? And she was like, no, that would be redundant. So for 3 years, we did what we call the 3-year beta test to see what happens when you've got a platform that's 70% women of color, less than 30% white women. Some people don't identify they choose not to identify their ethnicity. And what we found was that it was, just what we expected. A little over 70% of the funding volume was raised by white founders versus 28% of the funding volume was raised by women of color. And so mid 2019, Olivia and I were like, the beta test is over. We are creating iFundWomen of Color. We are going to be giving, a ton of attention to it. focusing grants towards it, focusing coaching towards it, because Olivia did a ton of research. And it's interesting because just on the networking piece, for women overall, and this was from Geri, I'm sorry, Geri's not here because she writes the Amex report every year. And from one of the Amex reports, 29% of all the women surveyed said that connections were, and networking was a key problem that they were having in getting funding. Well, we have over 70,000 women of color members of iFundWomen, 55% of which are Black women-owned businesses. And we did a survey of our women of color entrepreneurs, and 57%, so almost 60% versus almost 30%, double, said that lack of access to networks beyond their friends and family was the number one barrier to them accessing capital. So we doubled, tripled, quadrupled down on our networking, and we pulled in enterprises. So we took, Unilever, for example. Unilever assigned all of their brand managers, their people in finance, people in packaging, to different CPG founders that were in our network, and they became their mentors. So if you can imagine a startup founder in wherever creating a beauty product or a CPG product or a sanitizing solution, being matched up with a brand manager at Unilever who could help them level up instantaneously. That was the game changer. And so the final thing to say on this is we have brought 4 years of funding cumulatively up to parity. So where we were 70-30 white women of color, we are now 51% cumulatively women of color, 49% white. And I'm very proud of that fact. So I think that what this really proves is, like, Olivia and I are not celebrities. We didn't need, we just were two women on a mission to create some parity here. And obviously we know women of color are not all the same, but we had to start from somewhere. And so there is change coming, and it's not going to end, which is great. And I'm just was buying time until Van was back, and now she's here.
And one thing I'd say about that quickly, though, there's certainly a phenomenon where women of color are over mentored and underfunded, and so the mentoring piece is great, but I would guess a lot of it is the connections, right? So
well, that's what I just said. The 60% of connections. That's what we focused on. Why didn't you talk about coaching?
And I actually have
you mentioned mentoring. So just was saying that the often, if you're when I think about how to spend my time, I focus on sort of where can I go? There's lots of great content out there for kind of mentoring, to learn, to level up. And I love that you didn't just focus on that piece and also focus on the network, because that is, to your point, often where women of color lag behind. And certainly most of them are not needing advice. They just need the connection to the capital. And we love that you're doing that.
Yeah, well,
connection. In fact,
connection.
Just one more data point on that, just super quick. One more data point on that super quick is, for all women that were surveyed in the Amex report, 49% said that they needed coaching. But in our data set, the one that Olivia did with our Black women-owned businesses, largely, only 34% said they wanted coaching. So Sarah, to your point, they're enough with the coaching. We want the connections to capital.
Yeah. And I think that's the case for anyone who's trying to raise money. And I mean, we all know that. So two things. First of all, if you're watching and you have a question, please feel free to put that in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that and relay those questions. I would like to wrap up by asking each of you to give a piece of advice. And Anna, we'll start with you.
Perfect. So yeah, I think actually this piece of advice kind of is fitting off what Sarah and Karen were talking about. Whether I think one of the important things as women and founders and building our companies, what we have to remind ourselves is that we may actually not need as much coaching as we think we do, right? A lot of it is having confidence in our ability to build a business. So instead of when people come and ask, what is it that you need? We are so I think, we very easily say, oh, I would like advice and tips and coaching and somebody to mentor. And that is important. I 100% agree with that. But sometimes you just need to say, I need money. And kind of go out there and say, you know what, I'm building a great business. How can I get money? And I think, one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the sort of conversations that I've had with, there's a whole bunch of, networks and groups and whatnot that are supporting women. There is a lot of focus on giving advice and tips versus the money. And the check that a lot of these networks write is like $25,000 after you go through a rigorous process of 3 months for like showing X and Y and Z. Like, what? I don't have time for that. Like, I go to a male VC and like, I have a potential of getting like $500,000 with like way less work in a way, but I just have to believe that I am good enough to go there. And I remember actually I had like a conversation with a lady who was representing some female, I don't even remember which one it was, but like one of the female networks, and it was a meet and greet event where there were founders and investors, and I said, yeah, we're like raising our funding, and she said, why don't you send across a deck and I'll give you some tips? And I was like, I don't need tips. I don't have issue with my deck. I don't have money. That's what I need. Like, I don't need you to. I don't need that advice necessarily. I just need the funding. So my kind of point and conclusion is we should also remember to be confident enough. We may not need as much coaching and advice as just going out there asking for what we believe that we deserve.
That reminds me of a quote that I love. When you doubt your power, you give power to your doubt. Everyone, raising money, starting a business, being an entrepreneur requires that you own your power. You recognize your power and own it. Jennifer, words of advice?
I have to say, like, if you're starting and creating and building a company right now, just make sure you're thinking through the issues of diversity. You can look at the research out there now and see how much better companies perform that have diverse founding teams and that think about these issues up front, think about your culture up front, the way you want to put your best foot forward. I'm seeing more and more investors kind of putting their foot down of investing in the traditional kind of white male founder group, right? I'm trying to do that at New York State, but sometimes we, but for the most part, we're, really encouraging, looking at asking companies to report on the diversity and equity and inclusion, because it's important. And it's not only important because of just social issues, it's important because your business will be more successful for it. So think about it early, plan for it early, and create that culture of inclusion. That's so important.
Great advice. Karen, can you provide us with some words of wisdom? And then Sarah, I'll ask you to close us out, please.
Absolutely. So people always ask me what's the one thing you tell founders to do when they want to start a business? And it's actually two things. So one is you have a business when strangers are buying your product or service. And until then, you've got an idea that you've got to prototype and test and learn and iterate. And until you get customers that you do not know, you don't have a business. So that's number one. And number two is don't go into debt funding your proof of concept phase. Please, I beg of you, there are so many other ways to get people to fund your crowdfunding campaign, which is cash. You raise just enough to build your proof of concept and maybe do a little marketing or a little research, but going into credit card debt or even worse, bank debt, and putting up your personal assets to fund your business in the earliest stages, there are definitely places where small business loans can come in super handy, but in the earliest stages of your business, until you know you have one, just don't go into debt doing it. I've done it myself. I am, a dual citizen. This is not someone that's giving you advice that they haven't, experienced themselves. And that would be my source of wisdom. And you can do it.
It's great.
You can do it.
Sarah, parting words.
Yeah. So one piece of advice I like to give a lot that made me think of it from the mentorship conversation is this might sound counterintuitive, but I generally advise people don't ask questions you can Google. I think that there's a ton of research out there in the world. There's a ton of, I'm often tagged on Twitter or wherever, or panels like this, and people ask like questions like, how much should I raise in a seed round? Like, let me Google that for you.com, right? So there are so many barriers against you. And that just is, right? And we can work to change that world, but it's going to take a while. But in the meantime, Google is free, right? Setting up, proofs of concept by seeing, hey, does anybody like the Instagram content I'm pushing out for the, with the brand identity that I want to go build is free. Doing, surveys is free often. And so, just really, sometimes I think it can be so overwhelming to feel like there's so much bias. The world is so hard that you can't do anything. And there's a bunch of free stuff out there. If nothing else, you can Google my name or Karen's name or Van's name or any of our names and like listen to every podcast we've ever been on or every article we've ever, been quoted in. And if you think we're kind of smart, then learn more from us there, right? And so that when you are reaching out to say, hey, I want to raise money, to Anna's point, you don't need a ton of feedback on your deck because you already heard me say 1,000 times to use Guy Kawasaki's 10-slide pitch deck format. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to come to me and say, does my deck look good? Like, I don't know, you tell me. You can listen to me and hear what I think, right? So just because of how just entrenched and structural and terrible a lot of the barriers are, it's your job to say, what are the barriers that I can overcome for free on my own home computer? And if you're watching this, you have, some streaming bandwidth. So that's where I would really suggest leaning in, because being on top of things, having a deck that looks right, understanding your market, understanding what investors want in a pitch, listening to every episode of 20-Minute VC or whatever, gives you such a leg up that it can help make up for a lot of the stuff that unfairly, you're probably going to experience.
Yeah. And that, we'll close with this. Do the work. Just do the work. Do the work that's required. There's so many resources that are available. All of us have websites. The companies that we're associated with have websites that have helpful information. Thank you all. Geri, we missed you very much. But thank you all for being so flexible, and have a great afternoon.